What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved and humble actors finally reaches his breaking point on live television? What we witnessed on Good Morning America yesterday morning will go down as one of the most shocking moments in daytime television history. Keanu Reeves, known for his calm demeanor and philosophical approach to life, found himself in a heated battle of words with host George Stephanopoulos. That escalated so quickly it left the entire studio in stunned silence. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think really pushed Keanu over the edge. The morning started like any other promotional appearance. Keanu Reeves was scheduled for a standard interview segment to discuss his upcoming film project, a passion piece he had been developing for years about motorcycle culture and the bonds formed on the open road. The actor arrived at the studio in his typical understated fashion, wearing a simple black jacket and jeans, greeting crew members with his characteristic warmth and genuine interest in their lives. George Stephanopoulos, however, seemed to have a different agenda from the moment the cameras began rolling. Instead of the expected questions about the film, the creative process, or Keanu's legendary career, George immediately launched into what felt more like an interrogation than an interview. "Keanu, let's talk about something our viewers are really interested in," George began, his tone already carrying an edge that caught everyone off guard. "There have been persistent rumors about your personal life, your relationships, and frankly, some people are questioning whether your whole nice guy persona is just an elaborate act for the cameras." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Keanu's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, but those who knew him well could see the slight tightening around his eyes. He maintained his composure, responding with his usual thoughtful pause. Before speaking, "George, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, but I thought we were going to discuss the film. It's a project that means a great deal to me, and I think your audience would find the story behind it genuinely interesting." But George wasn't backing down. If anything, he seemed emboldened by Keanu's attempt to redirect the conversation. "Well, that's exactly what I'm talking about. This constant deflection, this refusal to engage with legitimate questions about who you really are. Don't you think the public deserves to know the real Keanu Reeves?" The host's aggressive tone was becoming more apparent with each word. Several crew members exchanged uncomfortable glances, and even the usually bustling studio seemed to quiet, as everyone sensed the tension building. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his voice remaining calm but carrying a new firmness. "I'm not deflecting anything, George. I'm here to talk about my work, which is what we agreed upon. If you want to have a philosophical discussion about authenticity and public personas, I'm happy to engage with that, but let's do it with respect." "Respect?" George's eyebrows shot up in a gesture that seemed almost mocking. "Is that what you call it when you've built an entire career on being the mysterious, brooding type, when you've made millions off playing characters who are essentially variations of yourself, if we're being honest?" The accusation was sharp and personal, cutting deeper than typical celebrity interview banter. Keanu's jaw tightened, and for the first time in the interview, his legendary patience showed signs of strain. "That's an interesting perspective, George, but I think you're oversimplifying both the craft of acting and the choices I've made in my career. Every role I take on requires me to find something genuine to connect with, something real to build from. That's not playing myself, that's doing the work." George leaned back in his chair with a smirk that suggested he was enjoying pushing Hollywood, most famously, Zen actor, toward a breaking point. "The work? Come on, Keanu. You show up, you say your lines with that same brooding intensity. You collect your paycheck, and you disappear until the next project. Where's the challenge in that? Where's the growth?" The studio had gone completely silent now. Even the camera operators seemed frozen, unsure whether they should continue filming what was rapidly becoming less of an interview and more of a personal attack. Keanu's breathing had become slightly more measured, a sign that he was working to maintain control. "George, I've been acting for over 3 decades. I've worked with some of the most talented directors and actors in the industry. I've taken on roles that challenged me, that scared me, that required me to dig deep into parts of myself I didn't even know existed. To reduce that to what you just described is not only unfair, it's simply not accurate." But George pressed on, his voice taking on an almost predatory quality. "And yet, here you are promoting another film where you play the strong, silent type who rides motorcycles and speaks in philosophical soundbites. Isn't that exactly the kind of typecasting you just claimed you avoid?" The question was designed to force Keanu into either defending his career choices or admitting to the very thing George was accusing him of. But instead of falling into either trap, Keanu did something unexpected. He smiled, but it wasn't his usual warm, genuine expression. This smile carried a different energy entirely. "You know what, George, you're absolutely right about one thing. I do have a type of character I'm drawn to. Characters who believe in something bigger than themselves, who try to do right by the people around them, who understand that strength isn't about domination or tearing others down to build yourself up. If that's tipcasting, then I'm proud to be tipcast." The response was measured but pointed. and George seemed to recognize that his attack strategy wasn't having the desired effect. Instead of backing down, however, he doubled down with even more intensity. That's a beautiful speech, Keanu, but let's talk about what really happened on the set of your last film. There were reports of conflicts with the director, crew members who felt intimidated by your presence, allegations that you used your star power to get your way when things didn't go according to your vision. The allegation was serious and, from what anyone knew about Keanu's reputation in the industry, completely unfounded. The actor's face went through a series of subtle changes, confusion giving way to realization, and then to something much more dangerous: controlled anger. The transformation in Keanu's demeanor was subtle but unmistakable. His shoulders straightened, his gaze sharpened, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that hadn't been there moments before. George, I'm going to stop you right there. Those allegations are not only false, they're defamatory. I've worked in this industry long enough to know when someone is trying to create controversy where none exists, and I'm not going to sit here and let you spread lies about my professional conduct. George's eyes lit up with what could only be described as predatory satisfaction. He had finally gotten a reaction, and he wasn't about to let the opportunity slip away. So, you're saying there's absolutely no truth to the reports, that you never had heated exchanges with the director, that crew members didn't complain about your behavior. I'm saying that you're manufacturing a narrative that doesn't exist, Keanu replied, his voice growing stronger with each word. I've had creative discussions with every director I've worked with. That's part of the collaborative process. But heated exchanges, intimidating crew members, that's fiction, George, and you know it. The host leaned forward, sensing weakness, where there was actually growing strength. But isn't it interesting that these stories keep following you? That there's always some controversy, some drama, some behind-the-scenes conflict that the studios work overtime to cover up. What stories, George? What controversies? Keanu's patience was clearly wearing thin now, his famous composure cracking under the weight of repeated false accusations. You keep making these vague references to problems and conflicts, but you haven't cited a single specific incident because they don't exist. George's smile became even more calculating. Well, let's talk specifics. Then, what about the incident in Toronto during the filming of your action sequence? Sources tell us that you became physically aggressive with a stunt coordinator who questioned your approach to a particular scene. The allegation was so outlandish, so completely contrary to everything anyone knew about Keanu Reeves, that several people in the studio actually gasped audibly. Keanu himself seemed momentarily stunned, not by guilt, but by the sheer audacity of the lie. That is completely false, Keanu said, his voice now carrying a dangerous edge. Not only did that incident never happen, but you're describing behavior that goes against everything I believe in and everything I've stood for throughout my entire career. I've never been physically aggressive with anyone on any set ever. But George wasn't finished. He had clearly come prepared with an arsenal of fabricated scenarios, each designed to push Keanu further, toward a breaking point. What about the reports from your co-stars? The whispers that you've become increasingly difficult to work with? That your famous kindness is really just a mask for someone who's actually quite controlling and demanding? Which co-stars? George? Keanu's voice was rising now, his legendary calm finally beginning to crack. Name one. Give me one specific example of a co-star who has said anything negative about working with me. Just one. George waved his hand dismissively as if the request for actual evidence was unreasonable. You know I can't reveal sources, Keanu, but the industry talks, and what they're saying isn't as flattering as your public image might suggest. The industry talks, Keanu repeated, and there was something in his tone that should have warned George to back down. You want to know what the industry actually says? They say I show up prepared. I treat everyone with respect. I do my job professionally. And I go home. They say I remember crew members' names, ask about their families, and make sure craft services has options for everyone's dietary restrictions. The actor's voice was gaining momentum now. Years of genuine kindness and professionalism backing up every word. They say, I've never once used my position to make anyone's job harder, that I've gone out of my way to make sets more comfortable and collaborative environments. That's what the industry actually says. George. George's smirk faltered slightly, but he pressed on with desperate determination. But surely you can understand why people might be skeptical of that image. It seems almost too good to be true, doesn't it? The perfect gentleman actor who never has a bad day, never loses his temper, never shows any human flaws. Human flaws? Keanu's eyebrows raised, and for the first time since the interview began, he looked genuinely incredulous. You think kindness and professionalism are inhuman? You think that treating people with respect is some kind of character defect? The question hung in the air, exposing the fundamental difference in worldview between the two men. George seemed to realize he had revealed something ugly about his own perspective, but instead of backing down, he became even more aggressive. I think it's calculated, Keanu. I think it's a carefully crafted public relations strategy designed to make you more bankable, more likable, more profitable. And I think the real you is probably a lot more complicated and a lot less admirable than the version you sell to the public." The accusation was so personal, so dismissive of everything Keanu had worked to build throughout his career that the studio fell into complete silence. Even the technical crew had stopped their usual background activities. Everyone focused on what was rapidly becoming a career-defining moment for both men. Keanu sat back in his chair, and for a moment it seemed like he might retreat into his usual diplomatic responses. But then something shifted. His posture straightened, his gaze became laser-focused, and when he spoke, his voice carried a authority that commanded attention. "George, I've been patient with you because I believe in giving people the benefit of the doubt. I thought maybe you were having a bad day. Maybe you were under pressure to create some kind of dramatic moment for your show. But what you're doing right now isn't journalism. It isn't entertainment, and it sure as hell isn't professional." The words were delivered with such calm precision that they seemed to hit George like physical blows. The host's confident smirk was completely gone now, replaced by something that looked almost like uncertainty. "You're sitting there making accusations based on absolutely nothing. Spreading rumors that you've either invented or accepted without any verification, and attacking not just my work, but my character, my integrity, and my fundamental values as a human being." Keanu's voice was rising steadily, not with anger, but with the kind of righteous indignation that comes from being pushed too far. "And you know what the most insulting part is? You're doing it all while pretending to be some kind of truth teller, some brave journalist who's willing to ask the hard questions." George tried to interject. "Keanu, I think you're overreacting to some standard interview questions." But the actor wasn't finished. "Standard questions." Keanu's voice carried a note of disbelief. "George, you've spent the last 15 minutes trying to tear down everything I've worked for based on gossip and innuendo. You've made serious allegations about my professional conduct without a shred of evidence. You've questioned my integrity, my authenticity, and my basic humanity." The studio had become so quiet that you could hear the air conditioning humming in the background. George, clearly rattled by Keanu's passionate defense, tried to regain control of the situation with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Look, Keanu, this is exactly what I'm talking about. The moment someone challenges your carefully constructed image, you become defensive and start lecturing about integrity and values. Isn't that just proving my point about how calculated all of this really is?" The response was so tone-deaf, so completely missing the point of everything Keanu had just said that even some of the crew members shook their heads in disbelief. But it was also the final straw for an actor who had spent decades treating everyone around him with respect and kindness. Keanu stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried more authority than any shouting could have. "But Chief George, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say, because I'm only going to say it once." The actor's gaze was steady, unflinching, and completely focused on the host, who was suddenly looking much less confident. "He just proved everything that's wrong with this kind of journalism, this kind of interview, and frankly, this kind of thinking." George tried to interrupt. "Now, wait a minute, Keanu," but the actor continued as if he hadn't spoken. "You asked me here, under the pretense of discussing my work, my art, something I've dedicated my life to. Instead, you've spent the entire time trying to tear me down based on rumors you can't substantiate, sources you won't name, and allegations you've clearly fabricated." The words were delivered with such precision that George seemed to shrink back in his chair. Around the studio, crew members were exchanging glances that clearly indicated they had never seen anything quite like this unfold on live television. "But here's what's really disturbing, George. 1. I defended myself when I stood up for my reputation and my character. Your immediate response was to claim that the defense itself was somehow evidence of guilt. That's not journalism. That's character assassination with a thin veneer of respectability." Keanu began to remove his microphone, his movements calm but purposeful. "You want to know what's calculated? This entire interview was calculated. You planned to ambush me, to create controversy where none existed, to manufacture drama for your ratings." George's face was flushed now. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. "Keanu, I think you're being a little dramatic. These are legitimate questions about a public figure." The actor paused in removing his microphone and looked directly at George with an expression that was equal parts disappointment and pity. "Legitimate questions. George, you accuse me of physically intimidating crew members, of being controlling and demanding, of building my entire career on deception. Those aren't questions, they're attacks. And when I asked you for specifics, for evidence, for anything that might substantiate these serious allegations, what did you give me? Vague references to unnamed sources and industry whispers. That's not journalism, George. That's gossip disguised as news." The microphone came off completely now, and Keanu set it down on the small table between them with a soft click that seemed to echo through the silent studio. You know what the saddest part is? I came here excited to talk about this film, about the incredible people I worked with, about the story we're trying to tell. Instead, I've spent the last 20 minutes defending basic human decency against someone who seems to think kindness is suspicious and professionalism is somehow fake. George made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Keanu, surely you can understand that the public has a right to know about the people they admire, to see behind the image that's presented to them. The actor shook his head slowly, and when he smiled, it was the saddest smile anyone in that studio had ever seen. The public does have a right to know, George. They have a right to know when someone is trying to manipulate them with manufactured controversy. They have a right to know when a journalist is more interested in creating drama than reporting truth. Keanu picked up his jacket from the back of his chair and began putting it on with the same calm deliberation he had shown throughout the interview. And they have a right to know when someone walks away from a situation that has become toxic and unproductive. "You're just going to leave?" George asked, and for the first time since the interview began, he sounded genuinely uncertain. "I'm going to leave because continuing this conversation would be a disservice to both of us and to everyone watching." Keanu replied, "You've made it clear that you're not interested in an honest discussion about my work or my life. You're interested in tearing someone down for entertainment value." The actor was fully dressed now, standing tall and composed despite everything that had just transpired. "I've spent my entire career trying to bring stories to life that matter, working with people who share that passion, treating everyone I encounter with the respect they deserve as human beings. I'm not going to sit here and let you turn that into something ugly just because conflict gets better ratings than collaboration." George made one final attempt to keep his guest from leaving. "So, this is how Keanu Reeves handles tough questions, just walks away when things get uncomfortable." The actor stopped at the edge of the interview area and turned back one last time. His expression wasn't angry anymore. It was something much more powerful, utterly certain of his own principles. "George, these weren't tough questions. Tough questions would have been about the challenges of bringing this story to screen, about working with motorcycles and stunts, about the themes we're exploring in the film. Tough questions would have been about my craft, my process, my growth. As an actor over 3 decades, what you did today was try to destroy someone's reputation based on nothing more than your own cynical assumptions about human nature. That's not tough, George. That's just cruel." With that, Keanu Reeves walked toward the studio exit, leaving behind a host who looked like he had just been completely dismantled on his own show. The crew members began to stir, unsure of what to do next, while George sat in his chair looking smaller somehow than he had when the interview began. The last thing viewers heard before the cameras finally stopped rolling was the sound of the studio door closing behind one of Hollywood's most respected actors who had just demonstrated that there are some lines that shouldn't be crossed even in the name of entertainment. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 25 minutes, but it would be talked about for years to come as the moment when Hollywood's nicest guy finally said, "Enough is enough." What did you think of this incredible confrontation? Do you believe Keanu was right to walk away, or should he have stayed and continued to defend himself? Let me know in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more incredible stories from the world of entertainment. The way Keanu handled this situation shows us all something important about standing up for your principles, even when the cameras are rolling.